You're listening to the Exjw African Thinkers.
Hi, my name is Yembe Khan. I am from Cameroon, a country in Central Africa, and I grew up in a family of Jehovah's Witnesses. This environment strongly influenced my childhood and adolescence, as I was forced to follow strict religious rules and participate in the preaching work. These restrictions led me to an identity crisis, questions about the meaning of freedom, and the dynamics of family relationships. In addition, I experienced family conflict and experiences that left emotional scars, but also led me to profound reflection on life. I wish to share my experience without anger or resentment, but with the aim of helping someone who finds themselves in the same situation as me, or to prevent someone else from falling into the trap of high control religions. So I faced various challenges. Although I had always loved being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it wasn't always a peaceful journey. I remember being impressed at the assemblies by various speakers and the brothers assigned to the sound system. Early on, I set myself the goal of becoming a Bethelite. My application for baptism was accepted after 2 attempts because the elders and my parents didn't think I was exemplary enough to the previous time. So ultimately, even after my baptism, I never held an important position. I was once assigned to carrying the mic, but this responsibility was taken away from me after I went to a music concert in the city where I lived without my parents' permission. And what makes it worse is that I came home late at 4 a.m. So after that, I began to wonder whether I would remain one of Jehovah's Witnesses as an adult. In retrospect, far from any desire to judge others, I admit that the reason was that by observing the lifestyle of a Jehovah's Witness member in my family, I began to question the assertion that Jehovah's Witnesses represented the best way of life. So everything changed when in 2017 the organization established congregations in local languages, and circles overseas through talks recommended that members who spoke these languages join the various congregations in the local languages they understood. For personal reasons, I did not feel the desire to join these congregations in local languages, but I had to comply with the choice of my family, who had decided to do so. It was at this point that I realized the coercive aspect, so I decided to no longer participate in family worship and to attend assemblies in other languages on my own, which marked the beginning of my defection. At 19, I was disfellowshipped for the first time, following a conflict with a brother in the congregation. Unable to bear the emotional blackmail and verbal abuse and ostracism from my family and other Jehovah's Witnesses, I asked to be reinstated. My request was granted, but I realized that my relationships with my former Jehovah's Witnesses associates will never be the same again. I was disfellowshipped for the second time in 2022 while I was in college for substance abuse. My doubts began when I read an article online that a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses had resigned. I subsequently asked my father, who was an elder, if this was true. He said yes, and from that moment on, I wanted to learn more about what I didn't know about his religion. So this began a series of research and reading that greatly enlightened me, and the teachings about Armageddon, sin, and divine judgment also created a conditioning that gave way to guilt and fear. So when I was a freshman in college, this manifested itself in nightmares that made me believe I had lost Jehovah's blessing. So consequently, I found myself writing to the elders several times to request a reinstatement. Faced with the refusal, I used alcohol to forget. Even though I had classmates or friends who were not Jehovah's Witnesses, I was constantly worried because I had grown up fearing worldly people. I was well aware of the Jehovah's Witnesses' stance on education at that time, and as a result, I told myself that my parents would never support my desire to pursue a university education. So this inner state made my school and academic career later difficult, as I didn't give my best. I must admit that compared to other disfellowshipped children of Jehovah's Witnesses, I was quite fortunate to have the support of my parents who, despite the constant emotional blackmail, were there for me during some difficult times. But it didn't come easily, as I remember that after graduating high school, I expressed a desire to pursue Chinese language study, but my father fiercely opposed this decision, claiming that the Chinese government opposed Jehovah's Witnesses. Far from wanting to take it personally, I now understand my father's reaction. Having held several positions or responsibility in the congregation, he had to reassure himself that he was setting an example by demanding strict adherence to the rules and recommendations from his friends, from his children. He later lost these responsibilities and since then has constantly blamed me for being the reason. As from 12 years old, I had been passionate about computers, and before dreaming of the Chinese language, I had promised myself to become a computer scientist, such a young age. But my father felt that I wasn't competent enough in science subject to succeed in this field, so he instead sent me to the art class. So to illustrate this level of passion, during my 5th year in high school, our computer science teacher was the same who taught this subject in the science class. So every Wednesday after teaching us art students, he had to continue in the science class. So since we were over, instead of going back home, I went to the science class to attend the computer science class with other classmates or with other friends who were there. And I felt fortunate that the teacher allowed me in and even accepted that I answer questions. So furthermore, I had joined the school's computer club, going against the recommendations of the elders in my assembly, who said that it was dangerous to participate in extracurricular activities. One day, after intense internal battle, I allowed myself to do some in-depth research and read books by a former member of the governing body and other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses with the aim of seeing if there were people in the same situation as me. This was a sort of relief as I began to understand how manipulation and conditioning through propaganda and repetition were used in this organization. I contrasted these with totalitarian regimes in Africa and Asia associated with psychological experiments or findings such as those of Milgram and the model developed by the BITE model developed by Prof. Hassan, but also the fact that the Jehovah's Witnesses organization are just one among many other high control groups that exploit the vulnerability of people around the world, especially here in Africa. So doctrinal changes regarding the end of the world, the double standards regarding education, and controversial statements by watchtower representatives in courts, such as the Australian Royal Commission in the context of inquiries into institutional response to allegations of child abuse, have each contributed to changing my view of these organizations. So through education and knowledge, I also try to overcome this challenge, and that is why from my first year at university, I found a stimulating environment that reinforced my curiosity. I attended lectures, conferences, and subscribed to several libraries for the first time, meeting people who inspired me to become the best version of myself. And during my reading, I learned that one of the best ways to understand a culture is to learn its language. I began by learning one of my country's local languages, which was a significant cultural enrichment.
You're listening to the XGW African Thinkers.
Subsequently, as a student of French and English linguistics, I set out to learn and become fluent in English as my official language is French. Since my excommunication, I had discovered personal development and on French language websites and channels, and I decided to switch to English language content. Thus, I wore headphones all the time, and this process continues even today, as I realized that learning a language is a lifelong process. Subsequently, I allowed myself to follow the content of the so-called apostates or the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or the ex-Jehovah's Witness activist. And thanks to this content, I was able to significantly develop my expressiveness in English while also learning more about people who had left the movement. So another opportunity showed up to me when a bilingual school in my locality gave me the opportunity to teach computer science in English, and I took this as a language internship for me, an opportunity to put those years of learning into practice, and I benefit from 2 years of teaching there. So in this sense, education allowed me to gradually rebuild my self-confidence. Yes, I've learned a lot. I realized the importance of trusting myself, especially when I'm surrounded by people who tell me to blindly accept everything. I saw how love can be used as a tool of control in high control groups. And as a result, I learned that true love, it does accept people as they are unconditionally, and I realized how trauma, neglect, and family conflicts that leave scars, but they also made me resilient, as pain can be used as a means of growth and empowerment. I learned that rebuilding oneself isn't always easy in isolation, and therefore there is value in connecting with people who understand our experience. If I had to give advice to someone in the same situation, I would just say, build your self-confidence, even if you grew up with people telling you what to do and how to do it, because your voice matters. Decision making is a skill to learn, and we can learn to question, to doubt, and search, and also accepting that we won't always find the answers to all our questions can also help. And you are not alone. Living in an environment like the Jehovah's Witnesses can feel like entering an isolated world, but there are many people around the world who have made this journey. Whether online or offline, there are people willing to listen to you without judgment. It's also important to understand that rebuilding takes time. As in my experience, some of you may experience anger, confusion, guilt, or even fear of divine judgment. But I'll just give yourself permission to experience them and gradually replace fear with knowledge and shame with a sense of self-compassion. You will gain a lot of strength from reading, studying, and listening to others. Education is among the best tools for deconstructing manipulation and building a new and authentic life. I recognize that forgiving others is sometimes optional, especially when one feels anger towards Jehovah's Witnesses or family members, or the leaders, or even the organization as a whole. But what is truly necessary is forgiving yourself. If I had to sum it all up in one sentence, I would say, don't be afraid to create your own path, even if it seems lonely.